Hey guys, Ringo here. Just wanted to throw together a quick startup tutorial video for us. So we're here in the cold dark Hornet. Before I start getting into switches and what we're going to do for a pre-sweep, keep in mind that this is not the MilSim level startup procedure, as what we're about to do would completely fry the ECU because everything is coming online at once. But for some of the new players in training, or for others that are struggling with the startup procedure, this is kind of the gamer level of the startup. So just keep those things in mind. And secondly, keep in mind that it's a video. If you need to pause it at any point or back it up at any point and review or take notes, this is why it's being created. Feel free to do so. Okay, so we start with a pre-cockpit sweep. We're going to sweep things on to desaturate ourselves when the engines start coming to life and we need to start aligning the jet through the INS with our stored heading. So the cockpit sweep is always going to start right back here at the KY58 panel, which is our encryption panel, and then it's going to work up this way to our radar altimeter, up to the helmet, across the DDI displays, dip down here in the center below the APM-CD for our ECM dial, to our brightness dial on that screen, over to the left DDI, and then down the left side of the jet all the way to our back left hip. So in order, starting for that cockpit sweep, back to this KY58 panel, we're going to turn this back right corner dial on. We're going to flip our radar to standby. If we are at an airfield like we are, and most of you will be practicing takeoff, landing, and overhead brake pattern work from an airfield before we get to the boat, this will now, INS dial here, will go to GND for ground. If we're at the boat, it'll go to CV for carrier vehicle. Then we come up here to the radar altimeter. I like to preset this at 300 feet, but to each their own. I like it at 300 feet because that lets me know uh, when I'm about a half mile from the back of the boat, when I'm trapping in a case 1 situation or case 3 situation. And then we come up here. Once the radar altimeter is set, we're going to come up here to the HMD dial for our helmet, and we're going to turn that up. And then we're going to look at our right DDI screen. We're going to flip that to the day if it's day, or night if it's night. And then we'll come down here to the center and we will flip our ECM dial to receive. And then down here, what I like to call what looks like an old school cassette deck. If we zoom in on that, we'll see ALR 67 power. That's the RWR, or lovingly referred to as the raw gear. We'll hit that power button, so that's pre-selected, and then come up here to that brightness knob and run that up as well, and then run the brightness of our HUD up. And then we move over to the left DDI and we run that to day as well. And I always like to cycle my flaps while the jet is powered down from half to full. And that's only because from time to time I notice some bugs where if I don't do so, the flap binding doesn't engage it from half to auto or from half to full. It's just a dead binding. So just as a healthy habit, so I don't run into that issue and overspeed or overg the flaps, I like to go ahead and dry cycle that switch. And then this is always a tricky one, but and at the airfield this doesn't really matter, but at the boat it will. So in the perspective of building healthy habits, looking right in front of the throttle there, we see that toggle switch there leaning forward underneath where it says strobe. We just click that back once so that the strobe lights or anti-collision lights are off. Again, at the airfield this doesn't matter, but let's build the healthy habits now so that we're not strobing on the boat. Okay, moving back, I like to typically run my raw gear volume and my AIM-9 volume with the RWR volume knobs and the weapon knobs. Run them back to about 50% just so they're not deafening you when those go live, and then flip the OBOGs or oxygen supply switch on. All right, and that's that for the pre-cockpit sweep. At this point, we would turn the battery on and start firing up the APU to get the fans spinning, and then we'll set our bingo bug, which we always set as a joker limit. This is going to change depending on how far the mission is, and how far you have to ingress and egress stuff like that. So this is not technically bingo. When this goes off, that doesn't mean you're in an emergency fuel state. It just means that you should start either thinking about hitting the tanker or thinking about heading home or back to the boat, whatever the case may be. So we'll set our bingo bug here on this screen that's called the IFE screen with the up and down arrows there. You don't have to spam press them one individually at a time per 100 pounds. You can hold that button down if you like um, to set that joker heading or that bingo bug. All right, now that the APU is fired up, we can go ahead and close the lid just so that when the engine's spool to life, it's not deafening us. We'll go ahead and flip the right engine first, and we are looking at the IFE and trying to look for 20 RPM, in which we will send the right throttle from cutoff to idle. Right there. See the throttle comes forward just a touch from cutoff to idle, and that's introducing fuel now to the right engine first, which powers the ECU. Wait for that right engine to spool to life, and I like to keep an eye on that crank switch for the engine until it neutralizes back into the center, and then immediately go for the left engine, watching the IFE, looking for 20 RPM on the top there, 12, 13, 14, and at 20 RPM, same process, introduce fuel to the left engine, and then I'm punching off the master caution button a few times, and then I come back down here to the FCS reset button. I hold that down for a few seconds. I push the takeoff trim button down next to that. I look down here for my stored heading, indicated by STDHDG on the bottom center screen. Now that the left engine is completely spooled to life, the APU will start to satisfy, and we could look over here at our bleed air knob. It's the bottom part of that dial that we want to spin 360 degrees so that we send the bleed air back through the engines. Now that we've spun that, eventually, and I'll watch it here, you'll see the APU ready light go out once the bleed air and the APU are satisfied with the rotation of the inlet fans. In just a little bit here, that should turn off automatically. And I'm just keeping an eye on it to show you that that's what it does. Typically, we would just keep moving along, but for the sake of information and learning, so you can see what the bleed air and the APU are doing to work together. There it goes right there. APU is now satisfied. The inlet fans are good. So from here, we're going to go over to the right DDI. Anytime you hear me refer to the menu button, that always means the bottom center button of that DDI that I'm referencing. So right DDI menu button again. On the left, we'll select HMD, mid setup, and we'll run the range of that setup to from 35 miles to 100 miles, and that's going to allow us to see data link returns through the helmet for up to 100 miles. So we'll hit return, and then go back to the menu here again, and again, then we'll select the HSI. We see that we have 0.5 OK on our HSI on the right screen there. Then we could throw our radar to operational because it does work by weight on wheels. The radar will not come to life until we are wheels off the ground. And from the airfield, we can go from ground to IFA for in-flight alignment, which will always keep the most accurate GPS alignment in the jet that we could possibly have. And then on the bottom screen here, we will select the menu button, SA from the right, sensors on the top left, and then RWR and SA in sequence from the top row, and that will now link the raw gear and the data link all to your SA page, and that screen should always be in this configuration. We go up to the UFC here, guys, and this is the upfront controller with the number pad and the item selection below it. We'll select IFF here and turn it on. Don't be confused if you hit it and you see nothing. That's because it's not on. So IFF, and then we hit on, and then we'll select data link on, and then the second page of the data link and on. And if you're ever in a server with me and you're looking for me, easiest way to find me is on mids A. Know that the two dots there selected over VOCA is mids A. Switch to channel 4, hit enter, You could check in mids Alpha 4 for me, and if you're in the same server, that's typically where you're going to find me if you're in a Hornet. Everything else from here, guys, comes into the pre-flight, which is going to be coordinate entry and pre-programming any kind of munitions, or pre-flighting any kind of munitions that we may need, which is going to be different depending on the mission and munitions that we're using. So from here, if assuming we already have our mission and our pre-flight, which will come in a later tutorial or later training individually for you, but from here we would technically be ready to taxi. So you can arm your ejection seat, look over to the left of your seat, and lock your harness by throwing that forward, disengaging your park and brake, and you are now officially ready to taxi. You could also on the left DDI hit the menu button and then the FCS page to ensure that you do have 12 degrees stab up trim and you're prepared for takeoff. If you don't see that numerology on the left DDI or the FCS page, ensure that you push your takeoff trim button down there again to get that. That takeoff trim can also be cheated up to 15 degrees from the airfield, depending on the weight of the jet when you're taking off. But 12 is typically going to do it for most loadouts. If you're really, really heavy because of bombs or certain munitions or added fuel that you're taking, you can cheat that from the airfield up to 15 degrees. And that'll do it for the gamer level startup tutorial. At this point, you would be ready to taxi. Hope it helps, boys. Feel free to review, rewind, pause, take notes, highly encouraged. And we may go into a full MilSim video later on down the road once people are comfortable with the startup procedure, because everything pretty much applies in the MilSim level startup that we've learned here. It just happens in a different order. Hope it helps, guys. Thanks a lot. Happy flying.